This is the Next Best Picture podcast, and today I am joined by the screenwriter of Queer, Justin Kuritzkes. Justin, thank you so much for stopping by today.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk to you guys.
Big fan of your work. I love Challengers a lot, and coming off that, what I found so interesting is how well executed the screenplay is on a structural manner. So jumping from Challengers to Queer, a film that is constantly evolving the more it goes on. And also, how does it feel in terms of transferring from your original work and now handling an artist like William S. Burroughs, who, you have the challenge of seeing it evolve in many ways as you're writing it and also making it a bit palatable. Burroughs' work is not, for many, I would say, but I'm curious, what were the challenges in facing that?
Uh, well, palatable was never something I was worried about when it came to adapting Burroughs. I knew that there was no version of the movie that was based on that book that was going to be that was going to operate in a normal, American mainstream movie way. No matter what version I wrote of that screenplay, it was always going to be relatively experimental. But what I found in Burroughs' book was this very universal longing and this very universal yearning for connection on a very deep level between two people. And I came into the reading of Queer because I hadn't read it before Luca handed me the book one day on set for Challengers and said, read this tonight and tell me if you'll adapt it for me. And I had some preconceived notion of what a Burroughs book was like, having read Naked Lunch. And I was surprised to find in Queer that for the most part, it was this fairly straightforward love story between these two very complicated people. And that the character, William Lee, in sort of contrast to the predominant image of Burroughs that exists in popular culture, which is this kind of austere, gruff, sometimes very macho, cool writer. I found William Lee, his alter ego, to be this very tender and sweet and kind of embarrassing person, who was still a piece of work in a lot of ways, and had a lot of issues. But he was the kind of guy who didn't know how to say the right thing, or sometimes didn't know when to shut up, or didn't know how to hide his the intensity of his longing and risk turning somebody off. And that felt like somebody who I could reach out and touch in a way that the sort of the predominant mode of how Burroughs is represented and how he represented himself felt a little distant to me.
I think that's what makes, also with Daniel Craig's brilliant performance, such a relatable character is that, you see him in the beginning and there's a suaveness, coated in sweats and all the cigarette smoke and drugs he
Yeah.
consumes. But like as soon as he's around Allerton, that facade just breaks away and he becomes so nervous and giddy. And it is inherently a relatable experience, having that feeling towards someone else. You mentioned, during Challengers, Luca handing you the book and was curious if you would adapt. That this is something that he has been open about wanting to make for a very long time. He's work that means a lot to him. Did that have any precedence in when you're writing it, especially as you guys are like this journey with you two and how your careers are going together? It's so beautiful to see happen. But, as you're writing, do you feel like this means a lot to Luca? I hope that, it lives up to something that he would expect and his vision, but also has to balance out with my sensibilities as a screenwriter. Did that ever come into mind, or were you more focused on I just want to make sure I'm doing good work first and foremost?
It's a bit of a mixture of both. I think I was very much aware of what the book meant to Luca when he gave it to me. And he had told me that this was a book he had read when he was a teenager and that he'd been wanting to make it into a movie since then. And so I felt tremendously honored that he would trust me with it. But I also felt this tremendous sense of responsibility and a bit of trepidation because I knew that it was I had to do nothing less than give Luca the movie he had been dreaming about, or give him the sort of platform to go make that movie. Um, Thankfully, I didn't have to do it in completely in the dark. I had this legendary book by this legendary author, and then I also had the benefit of being on set with Luca for weeks before I started writing. So we got to talk a lot before I put pen to paper about a kind of shared vision of what we thought were the cinematic possibilities of the book and how we wanted to honor the book and then depart from the book. So I was going into the writing of it with all of that ammunition and all of that sort of confidence at my back. And then coupled with that, I was coming from set every day with Luca and watching the way that he makes movies and sort of seeing cinematically through his eyes. And so when I would come home to write scenes for Queer, I was already putting them through the filter of the way that I wanted or expected Luca to make them, you know? So I was kind of selfishly writing a movie that I was excited to watch him make, which is a totally different process of writing for me. Challengers is something I wrote on spec, and it's an original idea, and that was true of everything I'd ever written before then. Queer is the first book or anything I've ever adapted. So I was both teaching myself how to adapt a book and writing a movie where I knew who the director was going to be for the first time. And that was a completely new way of writing for me.
And I would love to get into more the machinations of the Allerton character.
Yeah.
So much can be said about what Drew Starkey does for the performance, and a very quiet, guarded character. And a lot of that, is conveyed through the performance of what Luke is able to bring out of him. But I'm curious from a screenwriting perspective, how much, of course, there is legwork from the book that Burroughs wrote in terms of a character who you have to establish this dynamic of one-sided Uranus from Lee, but also it is such a guard that is slowly coming away because it's not entirely, one-sided. He does
No.
feel feelings. It's just this fear of letting himself be who he truly wants to be. So in terms of writing, how much are you able to lay down before, you hand it off to Luca and Drew and they're able to do from their end to amplify what you write?
Well, I think Drew and Luca have a tremendously difficult task in building that character, in that, as you say, he doesn't have nearly as much dialogue as Lee, and he doesn't wear his internal life on his sleeve in the same way that Lee does. Lee is a character who almost can't help but say what he's thinking all the time, which is why I find him relatable and why I think a lot of people find him relatable, because he's not composed, he's not withholding. Allerton is a guy who really spends his life not saying what he's thinking at all, and you have to put as much of that in the script as you can to give people to kind of give an invitation to build the character, or to give a window into the inner life of a character. But there's a moment where that really has to be taken over and given full ownership by the actor and by the director. And I think Drew had a really monumental task in front of him and just completely stepped up to it with his full being.
And it all builds up to what I think is one of the most stunning sequences I've seen in a film all year. I really want to talk about the writing of the interpretive dance sequence.
Oh, cool.
Which,
yeah.
For a film that there are quite various sexual scenes between, Lee and his different romantic lovers, nothing is as intimate as that dance sequence. It's literally, the binding of these two souls, the moment, he claims of finally understanding one another. I'm curious, again, another sequence where you have to, on a director's side, choreograph and plan it out. When you're writing it, did you have a vision of it being exactly how it turned out? Obviously things change throughout the different phases of principal photography. I'm just curious, like how much did the final version end up, correlating with what you put on this page?
I think emotionally and sort of on the level of meaning or intention, I think it's very similar. But that sequence, I mean, I remember when Luca showed me that sequence for the first time, because I wasn't on set when they shot that, because the writer's strike had happened. So I had to go home and they made the movie without me there. And then Luca sent me that scene afterwards. And I remember telling him I've never seen anything like this on film. I had a very similar reaction to you, that it felt like one of those rare instances where you're seeing something like actually fresh, you know. And a lot of that came out of Luca's vision and then choreography. We had Saul Lightfoot, the choreographer, and they, choreographed this dance that Daniel and Drew had been learning and working in for a while before we shot that sequence. But then on the level of the page, I ended up kind of relying on the same sorts of skills that I had learned as a playwright, where oftentimes you're not necessarily writing something that feels like an instruction manual as much as you're writing something that feels like an invitation, and you're trying to write a sequence that feels evocative or that communicates a feeling or a meaning, and then trusting your collaborators to make that real, in whatever way that they're going to bring their art to it. So that sequence on the page is very short, but it communicates enough to give them what they need to go make it, real, to go physicalize it. That's a very different approach, say, to how I approached the scenes of physical intimacy in the movie. The scenes where they're having sex, or the scenes where they're physically intimate with each other. Those I actually very rigidly plotted out.
Okay.
And that's because with something like that, I kind of feel like if you're going to ask actors and ask a director to show up to do that, you need to have the discipline to write it. You need to be willing to take the same risks in the writing that you're asking people to take in the performing. That coupled with the fact that I felt like with those scenes, the movie is happening there. So something is being revealed about character there, and something is at stake for them there. So the action of it is not superfluous, or it's not decorative. The action is drama, and so it needs to be plotted out. But when it comes to this thing that happens with them in the ayahuasca, at that point, they're communicating on this level of intuition, which is something they've been seeking after for the whole film. And so it's a much more open channel, and it's much more open for interpretation.
Yeah, we talked about the ayahuasca, when you were writing the screenplay and you've read the book, and you're going, okay, I'm getting an idea of how to write this out. Especially we mentioned earlier how the story evolves, and this first half is this kind of swooning, yearning romance, mainly one-sided, and then next thing you know, they are in the jungle and
Yeah.
it gets batshit, and they are just looking for drugs and scoring together, and you're balancing all these surrealistic moments. And Luca has talked about a lot of Powell and Pressburger films that have inspired him in terms of writing it. Did you ever feel like balancing the tone from a screenwriting perspective was a daunting task? Did you feel that, just because you already got a sense of working with Luca, that you felt he already had a grip on it, he already knows what he's going to do with it? It's just more so just guiding it along.
Well, no, you still have to do the work of balancing the tone in the screenplay, because you have to create a document that's going to communicate to everybody who signs up to do the movie what they're signing up for, and you have to make people feel like they're watching the movie on the page when they read the script. So it has to account for that, while at the same time leaving enough space for somebody like Luca to bring everything he's going to bring to it. Uh, when it comes to the sort of surrealism or the break from reality or, all of that, I think on one level, this is true of the book too, that it starts out in a very linear, realistic mode and then it gradually breaks apart as it goes. But if you watch the movie, the potential for that break is there in the early scenes too. There's all of these sorts of moments where the interior life of Lee or the sort of chaos of the mind breaks through the rigid frame of reality. Uh, whether that's the static of a TV buzzing in the background or whether it's Lee reaching out with a ghost hand to touch Allerton's face. The movie is hopefully hinting to you that the possibility for the kind of wild surrealism of the end is there.
And as we're wrapping up, I think it is very unique, you and Luca's relationship. I think, you guys already done two films together, and watching a story like Queer, inherently at the heart of it is just understanding, getting to a point where you can physically and even mentally and spiritually understand someone on such an intimate level. And I think while that a lot applies romantically, there's different relationships in life. And I think what you two have in terms of working together is so unique and special. And I'm so excited to see where it goes. So I'm wondering real quickly for you, what do you think is it that working with Luca so far, is that what he understands deeply about you as an artisan, as a screenwriter, as what you do creatively? What is it do you think that Luca fundamentally understands about you, and even what you think and understand about Luca?
Well, I couldn't speak for Luca, but I think something that was really clear to me very early on in our collaboration together, when I first met him to talk about Challengers, which he had just read, and, um, I just understood kind of immediately that this was like one of my people, that we spoke the same language, and that we didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining to each other why we were excited about something cinematically, because it was just there. The sort of understanding was already there. And so when that's true at the beginning of a relationship, you can end up talking to each other on a much deeper level because you're not spending a lot of time trying to just get in the same room, conversationally. You're kind of already there. So that I just feel very lucky that we met each other in that way. I think when it came to the process of writing Queer, it turned into this very kind of beautiful experience for me because on the one hand, I was working with this book by this legendary author who I didn't know, but I just had this work that he left behind. And on the other hand, I was writing a movie for this person who had quickly become a very close friend, you know? And so I felt like my job in some way was to open up a channel between the two of them, to act as a kind of medium between these two artists. And then somewhere along the way, find myself in there, which is inevitable when you write something that you can't. Your job when you're adapting a book like Queer is to really see the book clearly. And what that ends up meaning is that you have to let the book see you. You have to sort of let the book into you. And so I think I couldn't say what Luca sees in me as a collaborator. What I see in him as a collaborator is somebody who's incredibly specific about what excites him about film, and has a very sharp and clear vision, but is also a very generous collaborator who wants to let other people have a process where they get to have their own artistic experience and their own artistic voice within it. It's not the norm, and it's not a given that a director of Luca's stature would not just invite, but demand that a writer who has never had a credit on a movie before, has never written a script before, would be on set and in rehearsal and in pre-production every day. That's a really rare thing. And that speaks to his just total generosity and confidence. So Yeah, that's what I see in him, and that's what I treasure in him for sure.
Well, we are very thankful for your guys' work together. We're so excited to see whatever you guys do together in the future, or even what you just do on your own path together, because I think you're very exciting screenwriter. And I think the way I mentioned earlier, you structure screenplays and the characters you bring and inhabit, I think it's all very, very great for just film in general. So, Justin, thank you so much for.
I'm incredibly touched by all of that. Thank you so much. This is a real pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.